May is Maternal Mental Health Awareness Month, and this is episode 3 of our 4-part series dedicated to this very important topic. Today, I'm very grateful that my very dear friend, Caroline Vasquez, is joining me to share her postpartum depression and anxiety journey. Caroline is a full-time working mom of 2, and her willingness to share her story has helped so many women. I can't wait for you to meet her. Hi, I'm Allison Egidi, a pediatric sleep and wellness coach and a mom of 2. I love to help parents find solutions. This is How Long Till Bedtime. Hey, Caroline. I am so glad that you're joining me here today to talk about this really important topic. So, you and I grew up together, and I think it's safe to say we have a very close bond. And we are both very passionate about maternal mental health and getting rid of the stigma that can come with it. And you have been so open about your journey, and I've really admired you for that. And you've supported a lot of new moms, I think your friends, but also moms in my community, which I'm forever grateful for, and so are they. So before we dive in today, could you just introduce yourself to everyone? Because you're not someone who's well known in the online space. So tell us a little bit about your family and what you do.
Sure, happy to. It's good to see you, Al. And I am excited to be here to talk about a topic that, as you pointed out, is one that I'm pretty passionate about. So, my name is Caroline. I live in downtown Chicago with my husband, Mike, and our 2 kids. So, Hunter, my firstborn, is 5. Hadley, our second, is 3. And I am a full time working mom. I am the global head of brand and communications for a trading firm headquartered here in Chicago. And so definitely am balancing the work and mom life most days.
I think you're like most of the women in my world and community and audience that you're a overachiever. Okay,
Maybe.
I think so. So we have talked about a lot in this podcast and community about how some women will experience postpartum depression and anxiety with one baby, but maybe not all of the children that they have. And you are one of those lucky women who got to experience it with both of your children, maybe in a slightly different way, but you dealt with it both times. So let's start with your experience with Hunter. I know that you had been looking forward to being a mom for a long time. And like me, I think you had done a lot of preparing for the big moment and getting ready. And after he arrived, when did you notice that things weren't playing out the way you had expected them to or the way you had envisioned?
Yeah. So looking back, right, hindsight is 2020. I think almost immediately it was a challenge. I had a really challenging labor. As you know, and I know you share, I am a planner by nature. I had a birth plan, I had a structure of how this was going to go. And Hunter, bless him, like made me throw that all out the window. So I had an extremely long, really hard labor with him. And pretty immediately after, just felt differently than I expected. Now, of course, you've never been through this, so hard to gauge what's normal and what's not, and you're exhausted. And Hunter, they joked, was born awake, so he had his eyes open for pretty much the entire time we were in the hospital. But looking back, I mean, I think pretty immediately I felt this unsettled, different than I expected to feel, sense with him. I didn't feel the initial like surge of love that everybody tells you you're supposed to feel, that you can't believe this baby is yours. I had that, but it was more like, oh wow, you're mine. Like I have to take care of you. And I remember leaving the hospital with him and thinking, wow, like the whole world feels totally different than when I walked into the hospital 4 days ago. But it wasn't until probably 6, 7, maybe 8 weeks in that I really knew I was struggling enough that it was not normal. It wasn't just the baby blues, and I needed to try to find some help. And that was, that was definitely a challenging period because you're like nothing about life is normal, and you're exhausted and you don't have a lot of resources. And so I think it was kind of like the 2-month mark where I finally raised my hand and said, I'm not okay right now.
And before we started recording, you mentioned that one of the things was your husband Mike went right back to work. And so how did you handle your days initially when you were struggling? Were you just muddling through?
Probably. I think, and you and I have talked about this. I mean, I think I tried to sort of keep everything else status quo, right? We're going to get out of the house every day. I'm going to take a shower every day. I'm not going to nap when the baby naps. I'm going to cook dinner and I'm going to clean and organize and, maybe watch TV. But I didn't give myself a lot of space to just be in this transitional time. And I think that in some ways for me helped hide for myself how I was feeling because I just kind of stayed busy. Um, but we don't have family super close by. My parents were awesome and came in every Tuesday to bring us stuff and hang out with me. But we didn't have this large group of family members that could kind of take turns. And because Mike is a he's a startup guy, he runs his own businesses. He went back to work right away. So I was sort of left struggling to try to figure out, I was on maternity leave, so work wasn't there. What do you do with your day to stay sort of engaged and find pieces of yourself, which I think is also part of what gets lost in that shuffle, which can be really disorienting when you're a new mom, is you lose all the things that have up until then made you you.
Yeah, I think you just described that overachiever I was talking about.
Yeah.
You were trying to do all the
Yeah, of
things.
course.
So when you raised your hand at 8 weeks and you're like, "Something's not right," what would you describe as your symptoms at that point?
Yeah. So what I've learned subsequently, and what was my experience, is that it was generally my anxiety. So mine manifested largely as anxiety, some depression, but mine was more anxious thoughts. So ability not to settle. I was having a really hard time sleeping. My thoughts felt like they were just running. I had this weird sensation in my body that I like just needed to move all the time. There wasn't a lot of peace in my head. And they were worse. My symptoms were worse in the morning, which I've come to learn is very common with both anxiety and depression. And they would get sort of better throughout the day, which I think is kind of then how I convinced myself in the early days that everything was fine. I was like, oh, it was just a really hard night, as, as you know. And one of the reasons that I am, so thankful for you is that sleep is a huge cause of all of the postpartum issues. And so, when you're not sleeping well, you wake up in the morning, you're not rested, you're not thinking clearly. But mine was really just I had a hard time feeling settled in my body. I had a hard time looking forward to things. I had a hard time seeing sort of into the future when things would be different than what they were in the moment, and using that as sort of a grounding of this is temporary. It all felt very permanent. And as a result of that, I remember feeling almost panicked about what life was going to look like in my thoughts in the moment, like forever. I was never going to sleep again. I was never going to have time for myself again. I was never going to feel okay again. I now know that that's just a big lie. But it was certainly a very real feeling in the moment.
Totally. And what do you think finally helped you decide to raise your hand or decide to seek out help?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it got to the point where I'm not sure I felt like I had much of a choice. I mean, I felt like I was walking a tightrope. I did not have so very common with postpartum issues to have intrusive thoughts. So things that you're not welcoming into your body or into your mind that feel really scary. I did not have those. I had a just sense of being a ball of nerves and having a really hard time being grounded, being worried. Like I didn't look forward to going to bed. I knew I wasn't going to sleep well, and I was really anxious about that. I had a lot of fears that something was going to happen. And so, it was enough that I was not myself. I did not feel okay. And I knew that this wasn't normal. I didn't know exactly what it was, but it was bad enough that I'm not sure I would say that getting help felt like an option. It felt like a requirement to be able to continue to be the mom and wife and person that I wanted to be. And one of the things that you and I have talked about, and it certainly was true for me, is that then getting the help is so challenging. And I've said in a couple of places, I think even in the maybe in the blog that I wrote for you a while ago, it would have been easier if I had broken something, right? It was my mind that was not properly working and needed attention. But finding somebody that could see me immediately and help sort of get me back on track was like a big effort. And of course, that comes at a time when your mind is already telling you all these lies about you're not a good mom and you shouldn't be focusing on this. You need to just grunt through it. And so um, I think that that's a real broken part of our maternal care system in there not being sort of resources at the ready, knowing that, I think the statistics are probably not right because it's so underreported, but we know that at least 1 in 5, and I've read it's as many as they think is 1 in 4, women will suffer from a form of postpartum mental health challenges in the first 4 months of their postpartum journey. And so if you look at that, like why wouldn't we know we need those resources sort of on the upfront?
And by the time we raise our hands and realize we are struggling and we are able to see through the lies just enough to know we need help, you're ready.
You need it like immediately.
Exactly. So I'm curious, what did your journey look like? Where was the first place you went to try to get help? And then how did it play out? Because I think a lot of women feel very lost in this regard. So even when they decide, okay, I think I want to get help, I don't think it's very clear on the next step.
No, it's not. So my first call was to my OB, who I love and had seen for years. And she was wonderful in saying, "Okay, yup, hear you, and here are the resources." And Northwestern, where I gave birth, so one of the big hospitals downtown in downtown Chicago, has a whole center that deals with postpartum issues. Now, what I'll say is, like, I wish somebody as part of my hospital tour would have said, "Hey, FYI, look around. Some portion of you are going to have challenges on the back end of your pregnancy, and here are the resources." The same way that you've told me I need to have a pediatrician lined up, the same way you've told me a car seat needs to be installed in my car. I wish that I would have already had that material at the ready, and that Mike would have been there for that part of the conversation too, to know how to help me. And so he also pretty quickly sprung into action because I mean, I was having a really hard time even just like verbalizing what I needed. I really needed somebody else to kind of take control and get me somewhere. And so he made a lot of calls, then to some of the therapists that my OB had suggested, to this doctor. And then we also reached out. I had a doula. We also reached out to our doula, looking for resources. But even then, like the first therapist I went to see was not a fit. I don't know if it's because I was in the wrong headspace to be helped. I was just so tightly wound that I needed somebody. The only okay answer was going to be, "I can fix this for you right now." And that's not actually a reasonable answer. I am so grateful that I had a community of people who, once I opened up, surrounded me with kind of taking control of things and just shepherding me from appointment to appointment so that I could get the help that I needed. But I think your OB is a great place to start. Postpartum Support International is another great organization, and they even have a 24-hour text line that you can text and somebody will email you back. And then, there's usually maternal health centers that will have the right resources to point you in the right direction.
Absolutely. And then once you got help, what was the most helpful piece for your recovery? So, was it medication? Was it talk therapy? Was it a combination? What ended up kind of being the magic mixture for you? Because everyone's journey is different in that front as well.
Yeah, everyone's journey is different. I was lucky in that the first medication that they put me on was for me the right one. And I remember being really overwhelmed because when they started me on the meds, they said, look, it can take somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks for this to start to work. And when you're feeling, if you never experience this, it's hard to understand how exhausting it is physically to your body and certainly emotionally. But I remember thinking, I can't survive like 2 more weeks of this. So what do you mean it's going to take 2 weeks? I was really lucky. The medicine worked far faster than they had predicted, and it was the right one for me. But to any of your listeners who are struggling and have maybe tried something, if that doesn't end up being the right thing, there are a bunch of different choices, and you need to just keep being honest with your doctor about how you're feeling. And if it's not working, they will give you something else. So for me, I think the medication gave me enough to calm down where therapy was helpful, right? You have to be able to actually sit and have a conversation and process things and be honest. I needed medication to help get there. The other thing, and I am not saying this because I am on the Allison Egidi podcast, but the other, I mean, truly most helpful thing for me was getting at least 5 hours a night of consolidated sleep. As a nursing mom, real challenge to figure out how to make that happen. And as you know, I was not gifted with naturally good sleepers. So hiring help, nighttime help, was huge. Letting go of control for the first bottle of the night and using that beloved haka of mine so that Mike could take the first feeding and I could go to bed a little early was also really helpful. But really, the two things that I think most helped were sleep training Hunter, and then knowing that I was off the clock. So for my anxiety, that was really good to know, like, even if he peeps a little bit, I'm not going to see him. I'm not on duty. He's fine. I can stay in my bed and sleeping. And then actually for me going back to work, which was something I was dreading and had a lot of anxiety about. And then as soon as I went back, that felt like kind of the last piece of the puzzle. And I mean, I went back to work before we did the sleep training because I went back at 12 weeks with both of them. But that also gave me some space to focus on things other than all the baby stuff, which was very anxiety triggering for me.
And I'm so glad you mentioned that because I had a similar experience. And sometimes when I tell moms that, they think that's so weird. You're supposed to feel guilty about going back to work, or a lot of moms do. And I think that's fine. I think there's no right way to feel when you go back to work.
Yeah.
And I did feel anxious and I did feel guilt initially leading up to it. But it was when I first started to feel like myself with both girls. And, Addison definitely wasn't sleeping at that point because I had no idea what
Right.
was happening. But it was my sliver of normalcy, and I did feel better. And, on the sleep front, of course, I'm an advocate for getting the 5 hours of sleep, and I have a whole episode on it, which I will can't remember what number it is, but we'll link to it in the show notes. But I think you're a great example of making sure that you can make it work, that it is possible because you did not have children who are naturally inclined to sleep, and you were nursing and you had babies who still needed to be fed during the night, which of course they all do in the early months.
Yeah.
And we still found a way to make it work. And you got help. But even when you didn't have nighttime help, you and Mike made it work. And
Yes.
so it can feel very overwhelming, but it's always the first thing, particularly if you get put into a holding pattern where you're waiting to get additional help. It's like, okay, here's
Yes.
one thing we can do. We can do without assuming you have someone at home, which not everyone does, but assuming you have someone at home who can help, a partner or someone, then this one thing we can do to help a little bit before we can get additional resources.
Yeah, and I mean, I talked to my doctor about, was there anything I could take to help me go to sleep that would be safe, where I could still safely get up and feed my baby when I needed to. And I'm not gonna give medical advice here, and I'm not gonna name names, but my doctor gave me some very clear recommendations on things that were well tested, and that also helped reset my sleep rhythm. I know you and I have talked about this. I was part of another class you did that was about moms sleeping and how do we, but I needed help to break the pattern of not being able to sleep and having anxiety around my ability to go to sleep. And that's another place where for me temporary medication was really helpful in getting my rhythms back into, sleep. We say with kids, sleep begets sleep. And I think that that was also true for me. Like, as I was able to start sleeping, I felt better. And then I was also able to get better sleep when I had the opportunity.
Totally. And what did the journey look like there on? I know you didn't go too long before you were expecting your
Right.
second, but
Yeah.
how did the getting off the medication look? Like what was the path? When at what point did you think, "Okay, I'm ready," or did the therapist help you? What did that look like?
So the general rule is they like you to stay on for at least a year. I found out when Hunter turned about 1, that we were somewhat unexpectedly, I was still nursing. We were expecting baby number 2, so much more quickly than we had planned. And so at that point, I dialed off of my medication. I was feeling fine. I had already titrated down to a really low dose, but it's really important that the minute you feel good, you don't cold turkey take yourself off of something. That's just not good for, I mean, this is a chemical issue, and you need to let your brain chemically sort of wean off of the medication. And so I have no shame in having taken it, and so I was very sort of slow to come off of it. But once I found out I was pregnant, it is not one that is particularly advisable for early parts of pregnancy. And I didn't feel like I needed it. I felt great through my whole pregnancy. Physically, I didn't feel great, but mentally I felt really strong. My feeling was I went back to therapy as I was getting ready to have baby number 2, thinking, all right, I'm gonna solve some of these problems in advance. I'm a more prepared mom to be this time around. But I really was convinced I wasn't gonna have it with my second baby. I was sure that all of the things that had been so triggering with Hunter, the complete changing, and I was a advanced maternal age when I had Hunter, and so I had had a whole life as a grown up before he entered the picture. So I was sure that this one was going to be different. Like, my life had already changed. I already had a kid in diapers. I was already juggling the work, kid schedule. My social life had changed, and my priorities had shifted, and so it felt like surely this one's going to be a lot easier. Um, and so I really enjoyed the pregnancy. I did not have a lot of anxiety during the pregnancy about how I was going to feel after she was born.
And then how did that play out? So, we all know something happened.
Right.
Yeah, when did it become clear, like, "Ooh, this too is not quite what I expected."
Right. So best laid plans, right? So in the hospital, I felt pretty good. I mean, again, kind of a crazy, we Mike did not stay with me in the hospital. I only stayed in the hospital this time for like less than 24 hours. I had a not yet 2-year-old at home. I sent Hadley to the nursery so I could sleep, which is of course against all the new baby in room things. And I was like, oh no, no, I have learned my lesson. And I am gonna take these 2 hours of uninterrupted sleep while you wheel her around. And so I felt like leaving the hospital, I felt pretty good. I still didn't have, I just think I don't, I think I could have 10 babies and I would not have the rush of emotion. I still felt like, okay, you're here. I don't know you yet. I don't have a lot of like, I mean, I feel like your mom. I am going to take really good care of you, but with neither of them did I have this big rush of feelings. And I think that's a really common experience that no one wants to admit, because of course you're supposed to be like magically in love with this baby.
Totally.
But I felt much calmer. I knew a little bit about what I was doing. I was excited to get home and see Hunter. And so that one in the early days was was easier. I mean, she was also a terrible sleeper. But I was more prepared for that to be true with her. We were lucky in that Hunter still had our nanny share was still somewhat intact. The other mom and I had both had number twos right about the same time. And so he was at their house most of the time. She was almost done with her maternity leave. So bless our nanny, she agreed to have our two bigs plus one little for a little while. So I wasn't trying to juggle toddler and newborn, which I really think that would have been a big challenge. Hats off to the moms who managed to do that. He kept his schedule intact. But I remember just still feeling uncomfortable. And then the sleep really started to catch up to me. And then for me, the like warning sign that things are not going well is I have trouble sleeping. And so then I started having a lot of anxiety about going to bed. I couldn't stay asleep. It wasn't restful sleep. I would wake up with a lot of like anxiety. And so with her, it was probably still about the same kind of timeline. I just felt like I had walked the tightrope a little better this time around. Um, but it caught up to me again like a bit of a crashing car where all of a sudden I was like, yeah, I'm not okay. I mean, I remember reaching out to you and saying, like, okay, I know sleep is going to be the solution to this, and I'm in a really, really bad place. So, what do we do about this? I sent you a lot of SOS messages back in those days, which you very calmly and kindly answered. And, obviously, sleep training was not the solution when she was 7 weeks old. And so it was back to the things I knew, back to that experience of trying to get in to see the doctor, still a challenge.
Yeah, so was it just as challenging the second time around?
Just as challenging. I at least knew where to go, right? Because I went back to the same Northwestern center, but it's a program with rotational doctors, so it's a teaching hospital. So I had to start all over, and appointments were really hard to get. I did call my OB, who, knowing that I had had success with the medicine the first time around, she was still able to call in a prescription for me. So I was able to start that while waiting to actually see the prescribing, the full prescribing doctor. Um, but yeah, it was just as hard. Other than I thankfully had sort of therapy lined up, which was a good move because that at least gave me some outlet for balancing of, um, sort of feelings and a little bit of an outlet.
And was it I think it was your second pregnancy when I connected you with Holly, who does some coaching with new
Yeah,
moms. Was that your second
yeah,
pregnancy?
yeah, yeah.
And that I think that helped a little bit too, right? Because she
Oh, it's huge. I mean, she's amazing.
yeah.
She is, as I've said in other places. I mean, she's like the rainbow in that story because she had been through similar experiences. She was able to relate, and I mean, she happens to have training in some of this stuff. Although she was doing this more as she knew that you and I were such close friends, so more of as a friend. But I think that is also what has ignited sort of my passion around being really open about my struggles because seeing somebody else who to me had it all together, had enough resources to make this work, like should have had by all measures a very easy experience.
She's a therapist who had trouble.
Yes, made it feel like I wasn't broken. It wasn't anything that I had done wrong. It was just a medical issue like any other that needed attention and help. And she was very good at reminding me that I had, survived this battle once and I would again. And being a willing resource for my SOS sort of moments of just complete overwhelm when I needed somebody else to help me bring my temperature down. And things like podcasts of moms who have been through it and blogs of moms who have been through it for me were also really calming in seeing that the lies that I was telling myself were lies. Like, so seeing that reflected back to me through somebody else that I felt like had a similar experience was really powerful for me, when I was sort of in the throes of feeling like it was never going to be okay again.
And it helps you have hope that you will be well, that it's not gonna never end. And luckily, Holly yes, that's right, I forgot she did not have her business then, but she does have
No.
business now. In fact, I'm
Yes.
interviewing her next week.
Oh,
So
I love it.
she will also be on the podcast, and she's been another great resources to moms I work with, particularly
Yeah.
when they're in that struggle. So she doesn't, provide medication because this is more of a coaching business versus
Mhm.
therapy, but when you can't get help, even if you need medication, it's some of
Yeah.
that coaching can be really powerful. And yeah, she's fantastic. So I can't wait to chat with her
Yes.
as
She's
well.
amazing. Can't wait. I can't wait to listen.
And so when this time around, when did you start to feel better? Was it the same thing? Did you stay on medication for a year? What did that look like?
Yeah, so it really followed a very similar pattern. I went on the medication that started to give me enough space to feel like I was finding my equilibrium again. Continued to do my work in therapy just to get out what was causing my anxiety. And I started to sleep again. um, and so, and then I went back to work. I mean, same sort of thing. I mean, for me, like, I guess there is some benefit in going through it more than once because you're like, okay, I'm still who I am. The experience is somewhat familiar. And so I was able to repeat some of the things that I knew had been um, had been helpful to me prior. And so it really was a very similar cadence of, the medicine, the therapy, and then getting to a place where we could sleep train Hadley. And for me, there just is magic in those early days of, I say being off the clock. As a mom, you're never off the clock, but knowing that there was this point where if she decided 45 minutes in that she really would prefer to be out with us having, dinner, I didn't need to do anything about it. And that permission to then just rest and relax a little bit and not be so on guard for every noise, every peep, was also really, I think, helpful in being able to sort of turn the corner and also reclaim some of that as time for Mike and I to eat, catch up, and longer term to be able to do some work and plan for that. Um, but yeah, the sort of knowing that I had done my job and somebody else, aka her own eyes, could handle the sleep was pretty solid.
Yeah, I'm working right now with a mom who has a 10.5-month-old, and we were checking in yesterday, and she said, "I realized how much I was really struggling. I don't think I realized it until I've now gotten 5 nights of sleep." And I went to hot yoga, and she said for the first time in nearly a year, I felt like myself, and I don't think I realized how lost
Mhm.
I was, and I thought, "Oh, I've been there. So many of us have been there." And it took her getting some sleep. I think she has been seeing a therapist, but it took her getting some sleep to take that time, like you said, to do something for herself. And then that made her feel much more refreshed and, well, like herself. And then you can parent
Right.
like yourself.
Yes. Yes.
I am curious, and I can't remember if you had the same employer with both kids, but did you ever say anything to your employer or even to your colleagues about your struggles, or how did you navigate that?
Yeah. So I did not have the same employer. I hilariously changed jobs. I was hired by my current employer when I was 7.5 months pregnant, which is just crazy. So I switched jobs right before I gave birth to Hadley. And so I did not talk about it in the early days of coming back after Hunter was born, when I went back to my first job. I was not particularly open about it. I was still act in what I would call active management of it. I really didn't feel like I had fully turned to the page yet. I was somewhat protective, therefore, of kind of how I was doing and how I was feeling. And I really just like wanted to put some blinders on and do work. I did joke with my boss at the time, like, please don't let me make any real big decisions for you right now because I haven't slept well in like 3 months. But I think that was about as far as I went in being honest with him. When I came back to work after Hadley, it was the same thing, right? I was not yet back to sleeping well. I was still sort of in this active management phase, and but I was more honest. I sort of talked to my team about how I was feeling. I talked to my boss about how I was feeling, in loose terms, but just like, hey, just a heads up, like I've been struggling with some postpartum mental health issues. I'm fine. I'm happy to be back, but um I will keep you posted if that changes or if there's anything I need. And I felt like I was very much met with a lot of support and encouragement and relatable. I mean, this is again, it's like the secret of this disease, right? The minute you're willing to be brave enough to talk about the fact that you've struggled in a time that everybody else tells you is going to be the most magical time in your life, other than maybe what they say about getting married, um, the more everyone comes out of the woodwork and kind of says like, "Oh yeah, I had a really hard time too." And so I think it was also a good way to relate to some of the moms here at work when I came back.
Absolutely. And I recently saw you had something on LinkedIn where there was, I can't remember who you created that video or someone created it and you were interviewed in it. And it was a bunch of professional women, correct? Talking about
Yeah,
their journey back. How did that come
yeah,
about? Because that was a very uh, m- moving, compelling. I don't know the right word, but I thought
yeah,
this is awesome. And it's on LinkedIn. So it was clearly geared to hit the professional market
yeah,
and it appeared to be something designed for the workplace.
yeah. So it is created by an amazing woman named Ariana who runs a business called Stigma, so Stigma app, and she actually put out a call. She's based here in Chicago. She put out a call on one of the community Facebook groups that I'm part of, asking if there were any volunteers of people who had had mental health struggles and would be open to talking about them on camera. And I am always happy to share my story. I think there's a lot of power again in like raising the curtain on this issue. So I went and she interviewed me and I think I might have been the only one whose issue was this postpartum stuff. There were people there that were bipolar, suffering from schizophrenia, suffering from really like serious long-term depression. But her whole movement is in this creation of community for people who are struggling to be able to connect with people who have or who still are in that experience, because again, I just think there's so much power in seeing yourself in somebody that you say like, oh yeah, like you're somebody I admire, you're a strong person, you're an accomplished person, and you're struggling too, so it's okay that I'm having a hard time. So yeah, she's created an awesome sort of network of these stories and is in the middle of working on getting her all of her funding to be able to bring the Stigma app forward even more.
It was a really powerful video. So when you look back, now you're on the other side. I'm curious if there's advice that you wish you had received and you've kind of touched on it, or now, because I know you are so open, when you have a friend who tells you they're expecting, do you talk to them
Yeah.
proactively? I'm curious what you say to them.
I'm like the and I always say like, look, not everyone's gonna have the same experience that I did, but I'm gonna be a little bit of a bad news bear here because I wish somebody would have told me. And it's hard, right? Like I certainly it's kind of like the advice you get when you're pregnant, like, oh yeah, enjoy this ability to like go out on date night because that's gonna get a lot harder. And you're like, I don't know, okay, sure. I mean, it's a lot of it is very hard to understand until you're in it. But I think it's really important, whatever your experience has been, and maybe it is that it was this magical time, and maybe you have then advice you can give about what made it so wonderful for you. But I think it's just important to be honest about what the experience might be. And so I am pretty candid with friends, colleagues. I was actually talking to a relative stranger who reached out to me about something and then she told me she was pregnant and I was like, okay, I'm going to go way over like the relationship we currently have and I'm just going to tell you like I had a really hard time postpartum. You're another, very accomplished career woman and so FYI, if you find that this experience isn't as magical, rosy, and wonderful as everyone has told you it's supposed to be, that's okay. Like, there, just try not to have any expectations about how you're going to feel, what this experience is going to look like, because it's different for everybody. And I think just having that awareness that it's okay to say this is hard. It doesn't mean you're gonna a bad mom. It doesn't mean you're broken. It doesn't mean you're not gonna feel that overwhelming rush of love. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It just means that your body and your body chemistry has been through the biggest change it will ever go through in your life. So, in the first 24 hours after giving birth, your drop in hormones is the most significant drop you will ever have in your entire life. So, of course, for some of us, we don't like magically rebound and recalibrate. And so, in my opinion, just knowing that that's a possibility and that's okay. And and so I say, like, if you ever having a hard time, like, reach out. Like, I'd love to talk to you. I'll happily share my experience. And I do then the same when my friends have babies about week 2. I reach out and say, "Hey, yep, I'm curious about how baby X is doing, but I'm more curious, like, how are you actually doing?" Because what also happens when you're pregnant, everybody's all about you and how you're doing and how are you feeling. And you have this baby and, like, no one cares. They're like, "Oh, I just want to talk about the baby. How's the baby doing? I'm gonna come over. I want to hold the baby." And I joke, and I've joked with you because I came to see you not long after you had Addison. Like, you're the worst. If you haven't had a baby, you're like the worst friend when you visit your new mom friends because you don't understand. You're like, "I'm gonna go to bed. I'm gonna sleep in. I'm gonna let you make me food." I try to check in, and I encourage every other mom that's listening to check in, and dads too. I mean, I think my husband also needed some people to check in. Like, you're carrying the weight of what's happening in your house. How are you doing with that? Just to, like, give them space to give you an honest answer. And I think that's the big thing about all of this is creating for new moms space where it's very easy to talk about how you're doing and to then let others help
Yes.
marshal the resources that you need to get better because you will get better. Like, you will recover from this, and you will recover from this more quickly than you will believe you can. Um, but in the middle of that swirl, you might not be able to see that. And so I think the more opportunities we can create for moms to talk about how they're genuinely doing and to meet those feelings with no judgment, um, the more as a society we're going to be able to help moms move through this period more peacefully, more safely, and where they're not carrying around a lot of guilt about it.
Right, because if you've opened the door in advance and shared your story with someone you know or even don't know that well, but who could contact you, it allows them, if they're really deep in the throes where it feels almost too overwhelming to even try to find help, they at least know, hey, there's this one person I could reach out to and ask, how did they find help? And maybe it could kind of just give them that initial launching off point. And I always tell moms, even if no one has told you in your friend group that they struggled, if you are struggling and the only thing you can muster up is to tell one of your friends you're struggling or to tell your friend group,
Yeah,
start there because chances are 1 in 4 of them or 1 in 5 of them did struggle, whether they've talked openly about it or not. And they can either hear you out and kind of be that mirror to help you or tell you, yes, and there's this great resource. Here's someone who helped me. But the more open that we all are who did have struggles, the better. And I know you've said many times that you shouldn't have come here, but I was so glad you were here. And our experience was somewhat isolating because my mom was here for a short time and we have no family within
right.
driving distance. And so Laura came and stayed with
Yep.
me after both pregnancies, and then you came. And it actually was a bit of a lifeline to me to have people, again, kind of bringing out because we're such close friends. It didn't feel like a high pressure visit. So bringing out some of the old
Sure.
me, I felt less isolated. So I do think there are times where it's like, you maybe would have taken the baby more.
If I were on the other side, I would have been like, "So, why don't you go take a shower and I'm gonna sit here and hang with Addison?" Or, "Why don't you and Mike go out and get a cup of coffee?" Like, you have no
Totally.
sense that new moms are actually willing to hand off their baby, right? Because it's like, "Oh, no, 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 no. They're, like, attached. They love this thing. They don't want me to have this thing. Like, I'm just gonna hang out." And, there are certainly some that feel like that, but I called many of my mom friends who had gone before me, and I was like, "So, sorry about that visit." But you're right. I mean, I think, look, the bottom line is the best thing that we can all do for our friends when they're going through these times is show up. Like the best thing you can do is show up. Whether you know what to say, whether you know what to do to help, um, it's okay because at least you're helping them maintain that sense of community. And then when they feel the need, if they feel the need, they know that they have a safe place to say, like, hey, yeah, this is really hard. And it is. I mean, it's a massive life change. I really genuinely don't know, since I struggled both times, how anyone goes through this
I know.
and like breezes right through these periods. Now, I'll tell you, I blow my friends' minds away because I could take 2 and 3-year-olds and their craziness all day long. Doesn't faze me. I'm like, "Oh, you wanna whine about not having the red cup because you wanted the blue? I see you." Like, so I think we all have different tolerances for what is easier for us to manage than other things, but, I don't ever need, and I will never need to have a, like, 2-week-old ever again, except for holding and helping some of my friends.
Totally. Although I have great, admiration for the women who are like, "I love the newborn stage." I'm like, "Oh, God bless you."
Yes.
Well, Kara, thank you so much for joining me today. I am so grateful that you were able to move past the lies of your postpartum anxiety. And I mean, truly, I think the world is a better place because we have amazing women like you who are willing to share their story. And you and I will not give up. We will keep forging ahead to reduce the stigma around maternal mental health. And thank you for sharing your story with me today.
Well, it's really important stuff. I am honored to have been able to share my story, and I will encourage anyone who is listening who is having trouble to reach out to someone, whether it's you because they know you, or a close family member or friend. Do not let this become a place where you're living in isolation because there is help, and you will get better.
Absolutely. And if you just need an initial place to look for resources, postpartum.net is a fantastic place to start. And I will link to that in the show notes. And I will absolutely echo what Caroline said. If you are struggling, please know that you are not alone. You are not to blame. And with help, you will absolutely get better. So postpartum depression and anxiety are definitely treatable. All right. Thanks again, Caroline. Bye for now.
Thanks, Al.
Thank you for listening to How Long Till Bedtime. To learn how we can work together to improve your child's sleep, please visit sleepandwellnesscoach.com.